He saved an injured alien warrior girl, not realizing she'd be his future wife. HFY Story rocket. Most people in the galaxy had never heard of it. That was exactly why many humans liked living there. No crowded cities. No politics from the big galactic governments. Just forests, mountains, and small settlements where people lived simple lives. One of those people was Ethan Carter. Ethan lived alone in a small repair station outside the colony town. His workshop sat near the edge of a large forest. Cargo ships and ground vehicles often stopped by when they needed repairs. Ethan liked machines more than people. Machines were simple. If something broke, you fixed it. If something stopped working, you found a problem and repaired it. People were harder to understand. On this particular night, Ethan was finishing a long repair job. A cargo rover had arrived earlier with a damaged engine. The owner needed it working by morning. Ethan wiped the grease from his hands and tightened the final bolt. "There we go," he muttered to himself. The rover engine hummed to life smoothly. Ethan smiled a little. Fixing things always made him feel good. Outside, the sky above Eden, 12 was calm and full of stars. The forest around his workshop was quiet, except for the sound of wind moving through the tall trees. Ethan stepped outside to get some fresh air. That was when the sky exploded. A streak of burning fire cut across the night. Ethan blinked in shock. What the? The object tore through the atmosphere like a falling comet. Flames surrounded it as it dropped lower and lower. Then, boom! A distant explosion shook the ground. Birds burst from the trees. The forest echoed with the sound of snapping branches. Ethan stared toward the smoke rising above the trees. Something had crashed. He frowned. Eden. 12 did not have much traffic. Most ships stayed near the colony spaceport. Nothing should be falling out of the sky out here. Ethan quickly walked back into his workshop. If someone had crashed, they might need help. He grabbed a portable medical kit, a flashlight, and his old plasma cutter. The cutter was mostly used for metal work, but it could also cut through wreckage if someone was trapped. Ethan stepped outside again and looked toward the smoke. Well, guess I'm going exploring tonight. He started walking into the forest. The ground was uneven, and the thick trees made it hard to see far ahead. But the crash had left a clear trail. Broken branches, burned leaves, and pieces of strange metal scattered across the ground. Ethan slowed down as he examined one of the fragments. It was not human technology. The metal was smooth and dark, with glowing lines running across its surface. Definitely not from around here, Ethan said quietly. His curiosity grew stronger. After another 10 minutes of walking, Ethan finally reached the crash site. The clearing looked like something had punched through the forest. Trees were knocked over in every direction. Dirt and smoke filled the air. At the center of the destruction sat a small alien dropship. The ship had been badly damaged during the crash. One of its engines was completely gone, and the hull was split open on one side. Small sparks of electricity flickered across the broken metal. Ethan approached slowly. He had seen alien ships before at the colony spaceport, but this one looked different. Its design was sharp and aggressive, like something built for combat. A military ship. Ethan felt a little nervous. "Hope whoever was flying this survived," he said. He carefully climbed onto a piece of broken metal and looked inside the torn hull. The interior lights were flickering weakly. Inside the ship, he saw broken equipment, damaged control panels, and scorch marks from small explosions. Then he noticed something else. Someone was lying on the floor. Ethan jumped down and rushed inside. The figure was tall and wearing dark armor that looked both advanced and dangerous. Parts of the armor were cracked from the crash, and the person wearing it was clearly not human. The alien looked like a woman. Her skin had a pale silver color, and faint glowing patterns ran along her arms and neck. Long dark hair spilled across the floor beside her. She was breathing, but barely. A deep wound on her side had stained part of her armor with dark blood. Even unconscious, her hand still held a glowing plasma blade. Ethan froze for a moment. He had heard stories about alien warrior races. Some species were known across the galaxy for their strength and skill in battle. But right now, the warrior in front of him looked like she might die at any moment. Ethan slowly knelt beside her. "All right, let's see what we can do." He carefully removed the plasma blade from her hand and placed it on the floor out of reach. Then he opened his medical kit. Her biology was unfamiliar, but basic treatment was the same everywhere. Stop the bleeding. Ethan cleaned the wound as best he could and applied a medical foam seal. The alien woman did not wake up. Her breathing was still weak. Ethan glanced around the broken ship. "This place might explode if something shorts out," he said. He sighed. "Guess you're coming with me." The alien warrior was taller than him, and the armor made her even heavier. But Ethan had spent years lifting engines and machine parts. Compared to those, carrying one injured person was not impossible. He carefully lifted her into his arms. "You're lucky I work out," he joked quietly. The walk back to his workshop was slow and difficult. The forest was dark, and Ethan had to move carefully to avoid falling. But after almost 30 minutes, the lights of his repair station finally appeared through the trees. Ethan pushed open the door and carried the alien inside. He cleared a work table and gently laid her down. Under bright workshop lights, Ethan could finally see the details of her armor. The design was elegant, but clearly built for war. Symbols were engraved across the chest plate. Ethan did not recognize them. "Military for sure," he said. He removed some damaged armor pieces so he could treat her injuries properly. The wound on her side looked bad, but the medical foam had stopped the bleeding. Still, she needed rest. Ethan finished cleaning the injury and wrapped it with bandages. "There," he said softly. "You should live." Hours passed. The night slowly became quiet again. Ethan sat in a chair nearby, watching the strange visitor he had rescued. He wondered who she was, where she came from, and why a military ship had crashed on this peaceful world. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with him. Ethan leaned back in a chair and closed his eyes. A sudden movement woke him. The alien warrior had opened her eyes. Bright silver eyes locked onto him instantly. Before Ethan could say a single word, she moved faster than he expected. Her hand grabbed a metal tool from the table. She jumped from the bed and pointed the sharp edge directly at his throat. Her voice was cold and dangerous. "Identify yourself, human." Ethan slowly raised his hands. Ethan." The alien warrior narrowed her eyes. "Where am I?" "My repair shop," Ethan said calmly. There was a long silence. Then she asked the next question. "Why am I alive?" Ethan blinked. "You crashed in the forest," he explained. "You were bleeding pretty badly, so I fixed you up." The alien warrior stared at him with confusion. Among her people, warriors did not trust strangers, especially not humans. Yet this human had saved her life. Her grip on the tool loosened slightly, but she did not lower it. Ethan gave a small, awkward smile. "So, maybe we could start with not stabbing the guy who saved you?" The warrior blinked. The alien warrior did not lower the metal tool right away. Her silver eyes stayed locked on Ethan, studying him carefully. She looked at his face, his hands, and the small medical kit sitting on the table nearby. Ethan stood still with both hands raised. He did not want to make any sudden movements. After a long moment, the warrior finally spoke again. "You claim you saved me." Her voice was calm, but there was still danger in it. Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, you were bleeding pretty badly." The warrior looked down at her side. Her armor had been opened slightly, and clean bandages covered the wound. She gently touched the bandage. For a moment, she looked confused. Then she slowly lowered the metal tool. Ethan let out a quiet breath of relief. "Good," he said, "because that thing looked sharp." The alien warrior ignored his comment. Instead, she stood up from the table. She was taller than Ethan had first realized. Even without her full armor, she stood almost a head taller than him. Her movements were controlled and careful, like a trained fighter ready for danger at any moment. She looked around the workshop. Tools were scattered across workbenches. Machines and engines sat half open for repair. Shelves held spare parts and cables. It was a normal human mechanic shop. Nothing about it looked like a prison or military base. Finally, the warrior looked back at Ethan. "You are alone here?" Ethan nodded. "Yep, just me." She studied him again. "You are not a soldier." "Nope." "Not security." "Nope." She frowned slightly. Then why would you risk helping an unknown alien warrior? Ethan shrugged. You looked like you were dying. The warrior stared at him, clearly not expecting such a simple answer. Among her people, strangers were rarely trusted. Helping someone without knowing their rank or purpose was considered foolish. Yet this human had done exactly that. Ethan scratched the back of his head. Also, I couldn't just leave someone in a burning ship. The alien warrior slowly straightened her posture. Then she spoke with clear authority. I am Commander Lyra Vaethra of the Varelian Defense Fleet. Ethan blinked. That's a long name. Lyra ignored the comment. You have saved my life, human Ethan. She placed one hand over the center of her chest. Among my people, this creates a life debt. Ethan tilted his head. A life what? A sacred warrior debt, Lyra explained. It cannot be ignored. Ethan looked confused. So, what does that mean exactly? Lyra answered seriously. It means I now owe you my life. Ethan stared at her for a moment. Then he shrugged. You really don't. Lyra blinked. You saved me, she said firmly. The debt exists. Ethan waved his hand. It's fine. You were injured. Anyone would have helped. Lyra shook her head. No, not anyone. She had seen the galaxy. She knew how other species treated strangers, especially warriors. Many would have turned her over to authorities or left her die. But this human had carried her out of a crashed ship and treated her wounds, without asking for payment, without even knowing who she was. That was unusual. Lyra looked down at the bandages again. You treated injuries from a species you do not understand. Ethan smiled slightly. Medical basics are pretty universal. She looked back at him. You are a strange human. Ethan laughed. I get that a lot. For the first time, Lyra's serious expression softened slightly. But the calm moment did not last long. Lyra suddenly looked toward the workshop door. Her body became tense. Ethan noticed a change. What is it? Lyra moved quickly to a nearby window and looked outside. The forest beyond the workshop was quiet, but her instincts told her something was wrong. How far is the nearest colony settlement? She asked. About 15 kilometers, Ethan answered. Why? Lyra did not answer right away. Instead, she walked back to the workbench where Ethan had placed her plasma blade. She picked it up and activated it. The glowing blade hummed softly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That looks expensive. Lyra ignored him. My crash was not an accident, she said. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? Lyra's voice became serious. My ship was attacked. Ethan crossed his arms. By who? Lyra answered with one word. The Dravic Dominion. Ethan had heard that name before. They were known across several star systems as aggressive raiders who captured ships and attacked weaker colonies. That's not good, Ethan said. Lyra nodded. They will send scouts to confirm my death. Ethan thought for a moment. You think they followed your ship here? It is possible. Ethan sighed. Well, that complicates things. Lyra looked at him. You should leave this place. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Leave my workshop? Yes, Lyra said firmly. If they find me here, they will destroy everything. Ethan looked around his shop. The machines, the tools, the small home he had built for himself on this quiet world. Then he looked back at Lyra. You can barely stand, he said. I will survive. Ethan shook his head. Not alone. Lyra frowned slightly. You do not understand the danger. Ethan walked over to a nearby toolbox. He opened it and pulled out a strange device made from spare parts. What is that? Lyra asked. Ethan smiled. Improvised EMP trap. Lyra blinked. You built that last year, Ethan said, just in case some pirates tried to steal equipment. Lyra looked surprised. Then Ethan grabbed another device. And this is a motion-triggered drone. Lyra stared at him. You built weapons? Ethan shrugged. Technically, they're defensive tools. He looked toward the forest. If your raider friends show up, they'll get a surprise. Lyra studied him carefully. This quiet mechanic was not acting afraid. If anything, he seemed calm, prepared. That was not how most civilians reacted to danger. You are not a soldier, Lyra said slowly. Nope. Yet you prepare for battle. Ethan smiled. Out here on the frontier, you learn to be ready. Lyra crossed her arms. For the first time, she was beginning to understand something about humans. They were not always warriors. But when danger appeared, they adapted. Suddenly, a loud beeping sound came from Ethan's workbench. He walked over and looked at a small scanner screen. Huh, he said quietly. Lyra stepped closer. What is it? Ethan pointed at the screen. Several moving dots appeared on the radar. They just entered the forest. Lyra's eyes narrowed. Scouts. Ethan grabbed a small handheld device and clipped it to his belt. Guess your friends found us. Lyra activated her plasma blade again. Its blue light filled the workshop. She looked at Ethan. You should hide. Ethan shook his head. Nah. He walked toward the door. Lyra frowned. What are you doing? Ethan opened the door and looked out into the dark forest. Then he said calmly, setting the welcome party. Lyra stared at him. For a simple mechanic, the human looked strangely confident. And somewhere deep inside her mind, Commander Lyra Vaithra began to realize something important. The galaxy might not understand humans very well. But tonight, Ethan stood near the open door of the workshop, holding a small control device in his hand. The scanner screen inside the building still showed several moving dots. The Dravik scouts were getting closer. Commander Lyra Vaithra stood beside him, her glowing plasma blade humming softly in the darkness. Even though she was still injured, her posture was steady and ready for combat. Her sharp eyes watched the trees. They are moving carefully, Lyra said quietly. Ethan nodded. Yeah, looks like they know how to hunt. Lyra glanced at him. You do not seem afraid. Ethan shrugged. Being afraid won't fix the problem. Then he pointed toward the forest. I set a few surprises out there. Lyra raised an eyebrow. Surprises? Ethan smiled slightly. You'll see. A faint sound echoed between the trees. Branches moved. Dark shapes appeared among the shadows. Lyra's eyes narrowed. There, she whispered, for tall figures stepped out from the forest. The Dravik raiders were large and heavily armored. Their bodies were thick with muscle, and their armor plates looked like dark metal scales. Their helmets had narrow, glowing visors. Each of them carried advanced plasma rifles. One of them stepped forward and spoke through a loud translator. Commander Lyra Vaithra. His voice was cold and mechanical. You survived the crash. Lyra stepped forward slightly, placing herself between Ethan and the raiders. Your mission has failed, she said calmly. The Dravik leader laughed. You are alone, Commander. His visor turned toward Ethan. And guarded by a primitive human mechanic, Ethan leaned against the workshop doorframe. Hey, he said, I prefer the term creative engineer. The raiders ignored him. The leader raised his weapon. You will come with us. Lyra lifted her plasma blade. I will not. The Dravik leader sighed. Then we will take you by force. He fired. The plasma bolt shot toward Lyra, but suddenly the ground exploded beneath the raiders. Boom. A hidden EMP trap activated. Blue electricity flashed across the area. Two of the raiders dropped their weapons as their armor systems flickered. The leader stumbled back in surprise. What? Ethan pressed another button on his controller. From the trees above, two small drones dropped down and fired bursts of bright light. Flash bombs exploded. The forest filled with blinding white flashes. Lyra moved instantly. Even injured, her warrior training took control. She dashed forward with incredible speed. Her plasma blade cut through one raider's weapon before he could react. The Dravik soldier fell backward. Another raider tried to aim his rifle, but Ethan pressed another button. A loud metal launcher fired from the roof of the workshop. A heavy net made from reinforced cable dropped from above and trapped the raider against the ground. Lyra turned toward Ethan for a split second. You prepared all this? Ethan grinned. I told you I like being ready. The Dravik leader roared in anger. He charged forward through the smoke, raising a large energy blade. Lyra stepped forward to meet him. Their weapons collided with a bright flash. Even injured, Lyra moved with incredible skill. Every motion was precise and controlled. But the Dravik leader was powerful. He pushed forward with brute strength. Their blades clashed again and again. Ethan watched for a moment. Okay, time for plan B. He ran back into the workshop. Lyra blocked another heavy strike from the raider. Her injured side burned with pain, but she did not step back. The Dravik leader laughed. "You are weak, Commander." Lyra said nothing. She waited. Suddenly, a loud mechanical sound came from the workshop. The Dravik leader looked up. A strange machine rolled out of the building. It looked like a small metal cart with several spinning tools attached to the front. Ethan sat behind controls. "Say hello to my modified repair rover." The machine accelerated forward. The spinning tools slammed into the Dravik leader's armor, pushing him backward across the dirt. The raider lost his balance and crashed into a fallen tree. Lyra did not hesitate. She stepped forward and pointed her plasma blade at his chest. The battle stopped. The forest became quiet again. The remaining Dravik soldiers were either trapped, disarmed, or unconscious. Ethan turned off the rover and stepped down. "Well," he said, "that went better than expected." Lyra slowly powered down her plasma blade. She looked around the battlefield. 4 trained Dravik raiders had been defeated by a wounded warrior and a human mechanic. She turned to Ethan. "You turned farming equipment into combat machines." Ethan shrugged. "When you work with machines long enough, you learn they can do more than their original job." Lyra studied him carefully. Most species separated civilians and warriors, but humans seemed to blur that line. Even someone who fixed engines could become dangerous when needed. The Dravik leader groaned from the ground. Lyra looked down at him. "Why were you hunting me?" she demanded. The raider laughed weakly. "You already know." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "The data core." The raider smiled behind his helmet. "You carry something valuable, Commander." Ethan crossed his arms. "What kind of data?" Lyra hesitated. Then she answered, "Military strategy files." Ethan nodded slowly. "So, something worth stealing." Lyra looked serious. "If the Dominion obtains that data, they could win several major battles." Ethan looked toward the trapped raiders. "Then I guess could we stop them?" Lyra shook her head. "No." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Lyra looked toward the stars above the forest. "These were only scouts." Her voice became quiet. "The Dominion will send more." Ethan sighed. "Of course they will." Lyra turned back to him. "You should leave Eden 12. Ethan looked surprised. "Leave." "They will search this world now," Lyra explained. "You are involved." Ethan thought about that. He looked around his workshop again. His quiet life on Eden 12 had been simple, peaceful, but that life had already changed the moment he walked into the forest. Finally, Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "Well," he smiled slightly, "I guess my vacation just got canceled." Lyra tilted her head. "You are not leaving?" Ethan shook his head. "Nope." He pointed at her bandaged wound. "You still need medical care." Lyra stared at him. "You would risk yourself again?" Ethan shrugged. "You helped fight too." There was a long silence. Then Lyra slowly nodded. For the first time in many years, Commander Lyra Vaithra felt something unexpected. Trust, and deep in her warrior culture, a powerful truth was beginning to form. The human who saved her life was becoming something more important than a simple rescuer. The life debt between them was growing stronger, much stronger than either of them realized. And somewhere out in space, the Dravik Dominion was already preparing their next move. Soft sunlight moved through the tall forest trees and reached Ethan's small workshop. Birds began to sing again, and the quiet sounds of nature returned. But the ground outside the workshop still showed the marks of last night's battle. Broken branches, burned grass, and several unconscious Dravik raiders tied securely with reinforced cables. Inside the workshop, Ethan was busy working again. To him, fixing things always helped clear his mind. Right now, he was repairing one of the captured Dravik plasma rifles. Commander Lyra Vaithra stood near the doorway, watching the forest carefully. Her wound was still healing, but she stood tall and alert like a true warrior. After a few minutes, she spoke. "They will come." Ethan looked up from the rifle. "More scouts." Lyra shook her head slowly. No. Her silver eyes looked toward the sky. They're warships. Ethan sighed. Yeah, that sounds about right. He placed the plasma rifle on the table. If they bring ships, my little traps probably won't help much. Lyra turned toward him. You should still leave. Ethan leaned back in his chair. You said that yesterday. And you did not listen, Lyra replied. Ethan smiled slightly. That's kind of human tradition. Lyra almost smiled back, but her expression quickly became serious again. My fleet will also be searching for me, she said. Ethan nodded. So, eventually someone friendly will show up. Perhaps, Lyra said, but until then, this world is in danger. Ethan stood up and stretched. He walked over to the workshop door and looked outside at the quiet forest. This place has been peaceful for years, he said. Then he looked back at Lyra. I'm not letting some raiders ruin that. Lyra studied him carefully. Humans were strange. Most civilians in the galaxy would run from danger, but Ethan seemed determined to face it, even though he had no military training, no armor, and no fleet behind him. Lyra spoke slowly. You fight like a warrior. Ethan shook his head. I'm not a warrior. You protected someone weaker than yourself, Lyra said. You faced enemies without fear. She placed her hand over her chest again. Among my people, that is the definition of a warrior. Ethan scratched his head. Well, I mostly just fix machines. Lyra looked around the workshop. Broken engines, improvised drones, a modified repair rover that had defeated a trained Dravik soldier. She raised an eyebrow. Your machines seem very effective. Ethan laughed. I like to improvise. Suddenly, a loud alarm beeped from the scanner. Both of them turned toward the screen. Several large signals appeared on the radar. Lyra's expression became serious. They are here. Ethan walked closer to the scanner. 3 ships, he said. Big ones. Lyra nodded. Dravik assault ships. Ethan whistled quietly. That's a bit more than 4 scouts. Lyra looked toward the sky. Through the trees, dark shapes could be seen moving above the clouds. The Dravik ships had arrived. Ethan crossed his arms. All right, he said. Time to think. Lyra looked at him. You cannot fight warships with workshop tools. Ethan smiled. Maybe not. Then he pointed toward the forest. But we can slow them down. Lyra waited. Ethan quickly walked to a storage shelf and grabbed a small device. This is a long-range signal booster, he explained. Lyra frowned. For what purpose? Ethan plugged the device into the scanner. I'm calling the colony. Lyra understood immediately. A warning. Ethan nodded. If the colony sends a distress signal to the nearest patrol fleet, help might arrive. Lyra watched as Ethan adjusted the signal settings. Within seconds, the message was transmitted. He leaned back. Okay, Ethan said. Now we buy time. Outside, the Dravik ship slowly lowered toward the forest. Small troop transports began dropping from their hulls. Lyra activated her plasma blade again. Ethan picked up the repaired plasma rifle. You know how to use that? Lyra asked. Ethan shrugged. I watched you earlier. Lyra almost laughed. The first troop transport landed heavily in the clearing. The door opened. Several Dravik soldiers stepped out, but before they could advance, a loud sonic blast filled the sky. Both Ethan and Lyra looked up. A bright blue ship burst through the clouds. Then another, and another. Lyra's eyes widened. That is... The ships were sleek and silver, with glowing blue engines. They moved faster than the Dravik vessels. Ethan smiled. Friends of yours. Lyra nodded slowly. My fleet? The Varelian ships opened fire. Precise energy beams struck the Dravik warships. Explosions flashed across the sky. Within minutes, the Dravik vessels were forced to retreat. The surviving troop transports quickly lifted off and escaped into orbit. The forest became quiet again. A large Varelian shuttle slowly descended into the clearing. The door opened. Several armored warriors stepped out. They looked powerful and disciplined, clearly elite soldiers. One of them walked forward and saluted Lyra. Commander Vaithra, he said. We feared you were lost. Lyra lowered her blade. I survived. The warrior glanced toward Ethan. And the human? Lyra looked at Ethan for a moment. Then she answered clearly, He saved my life. The Varelian warriors looked surprised. Saving a commander was not a small action. Their leader stepped forward and studied Ethan. You defended her against a Dravik? Ethan shrugged. With a little help. Lyra crossed her arms. The human fought with honor. There was a moment of silence. Then the Varelian leader nodded respectfully toward Ethan. You have our gratitude. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. No problem. Lyra stepped closer to him. There is something else, she said. Ethan tilted his head. What? Lyra spoke calmly. In Varelian tradition, a life debt between warriors creates a permanent bond. Ethan blinked. Okay. Lyra continued. This bond is stronger than friendship. Ethan waited. Then he slowly realized what she meant. His eyes widened. Wait! Lyra gave a small smile. Among her people, such bonds often became lifelong partnerships. Ethan stared at her for several seconds. You mean? Lyra nodded once. The Varelian warriors behind her watched quietly. Ethan looked around awkwardly. Well, he scratched his head again. I definitely wasn't expecting that. Lyra laughed softly. For the first time since arriving on Eden 12, she looked completely relaxed. Years later, the galaxy would remember this strange moment. A human mechanic saving an alien commander, a battle against raiders in a quiet forest, and the beginning of a powerful alliance between humans and the Varelian people. But to Ethan and Lyra, it was simply the day a mechanic helped a stranger.